This podcast of the hour is brought to you by Budweiser, king of beers.
There's part of the backstory, and here is the man, Bjorn Lomborg. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. You can't be a real big hit in the environmental community at the moment, are you?
No, there's a lot of people who are a little annoyed. But of course, what I'm really trying to say is we need to get this right. I mean, climate change is a problem, but we also got to make smart moves. And we're not doing that right now. The Kyoto Protocol, as we just saw, we all enacted it. But first of all, Canada and, the US and Australia didn't actually sign up. But also Canada and Japan are not going to do it. But even if everybody did it, it would cost about $180 billion. But do virtually no good. It would postpone global warming by 7 days at the end of the century.
You see, now this is why I think that you were mistitled, and I don't know if it's you or somebody, but you're called a skeptical environmentalist. It was one of your books, and I don't think that's accurate. I don't think you are a skeptical environmentalist. I think you just have a problem with the way it's being approached. Now, if I read your book here, Politics of Global Warming, it says very clear, and this is where I find you in a very interesting position, because I know that there are a lot of people who like to look at you and go, see, there's somebody who's saying that global warming isn't a problem. You're saying very clearly that global warming is happening and that it will cause more heat deaths, an increase in sea level, and it will not be good for society. So what are you saying then that people should do?
Well, I'm simply saying, obviously that we should cool our conversation, because right now everybody's sort of panicking and running around and saying, oh my God, we got to do something. That's not very helpful for dealing with a problem that is really going to be a 50 to 100 year problem. We need to find long-term solutions. Now, we can cut our emissions a little bit in the rich world and feel all good about ourselves, but it costs a lot, and it'll do, as I just said, nothing at the end of the century. This is about making sure that we get much better technologies for dealing with climate change through the century.
A point that you raise in this book, which is interesting and reasonable as well, is that when there's a lot of hysteria around any issue, hysteria doesn't make for good policy. And we are in that stage now where people are certainly talking about climate change. They're talking about the environment. You hear it as when you poll, certainly Canadians, it's the #1 issue to them. But again, it doesn't make good policy, in your mind. So how then do you harness the energy of people and this, like, an inconvenient truth, which is fraught with its own problems for a lot of people, including yourself, is certainly credited for introducing a whole lot of people to this issue.
And I think we should thank Al Gore for having put it on the stage, but I think we should also realize that it's not the immediate catastrophe that it's often sold as take, for instance, Al Gore will talk about the fact that we'll have more and more heat deaths. That's true. As temperatures rise, we're going to see more heat waves, more heat deaths. So in the UK, it's estimated we'll see about 2,000 more heat deaths every year in 2050. But of course, as temperatures rise, we're also going to see fewer cold waves and fewer cold deaths. And in the UK, again, it's estimated that we're going to see about 20,000 fewer cold deaths.
So we're just going to transfer the deaths from the winter to the summer?
Actually, it's going to be better, right, in that particular area, because we're going to have 2,000 more people dying, but 20,000 fewer dying. And my point is simply to say we don't have a good public debate if we only hear the 2,000 more deaths, but don't hear the 20,000 fewer deaths.
Why does it seem then that you are put in an adversarial position to the environmental movement then? Well,
I think it's partly because we have this hysteria that it's either you're for us or you're against us. And there's this sense that the debate is brought up between the people who say, oh, it's all a left-wing conspiracy to raise taxes, and people who are saying, oh, it's a catastrophe and we've got to act right now. And the New York Times actually a couple of weeks ago said, Bjorn Lomborg is trying to stake out a middle ground in this. And I think if you do that, you end up getting attacked from both sides. But I tend to think, if you get equal amounts of hate mail from both sides, maybe you're doing something right.
Hey, tell me about it, man. Absolutely. That totally works. However, there is a part of it where you are becoming the poster child for the right-wing anti-environmental movement.
Absolutely. I mean, I get engaged and I get captured by a lot of people that I'm not too comfortable with. Whereas a lot of the people that I feel should be my friends are the ones who are the most annoyed about me. But really, this is not a question about being left wing or right wing. I hope being smart is not a left or a right wing epitaph. It really is about making sure that we do smart things, both for the world right now, but also making sure that we deal with climate change in the medium run. But that's about investment in research and development.
And does it boil down to the fact that we are living in an era right now where we are an extremely partisan group of people? Certainly when it comes to politicians and the media and such. I mean, the Fraser Institute is sponsoring your tour, and depending on how you look at it, some call them a very right-wing think tank, some call them just a pro-business think tank that are not right-wing at all. So we just live in this world now where you're either that way or that way, and there's not going to be any progress on an issue because people won't get past the fact that there's a title, a headline.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but what I try to do is, I mean, I give the same talk no matter whether I talk to the World Ecologist or I talk to Fraser Institute or anywhere else, and I probably get branded differently because we should thank Al Gore for having put this on. And feel sort of gasp going through sometimes when I talk to the Fraser Institute, but that's how it is. We should thank him for putting it on the agenda, but we should not thank him for having made everybody incredibly over-worried right now. We need to realize that this is a long-term problem. And I think you can only, repeat this point again and again. Right now, we are not doing very much to actually deal with climate change. We're just talking a lot. I want us to find ways that are both cheaper and smarter. And we're going to have the next Kyoto round in Copenhagen in 2009. And I'm hoping that we will come out with that. Instead of saying, let's cut carbon emissions even more and see another failure, let's rather say, let's invest in research and development, 0.05% of GDP. It'll be 10 times cheaper than Kyoto, but it'll be 10 times more effective. It'll actually increase research and development 10 times worldwide. That's how we're going to solve this problem in the long run.
Is one of the challenges, I don't even know the reality, is that we are looking at the tree now rather than the forest, in that every big movement needs an initial thrust. It's going to be noisy, it's going to be messy, it's not going to be the most effective way, but it's going to get a lot of people talking about it. Then once the thrust is done and all the hysteria settles, it will just become part of the movement. The AIDS pandemic in Africa, you remember in New York City, mother to infant transmission is gone essentially, and there was this big hysteria to start with, and then people sort of settled in and have now got a path. Is that just going to happen here as well? We're just early on in this debate publicly, and there will be a lot of hysteria on both sides. You'll be this, they'll be that, and eventually we'll just settle in and figure it out?
Well, hopefully. But I think there are some worrying signs, partly that we are promising way too much, and we're going to get very, very disappointed. I mean, notice in Rio in 1992, we promised we were going to cut emissions. We didn't live up to that. And then in Kyoto, we promised we were not going to live up to that. And there's a sense that we're going to be promising even more. So there's a lot of promises out there that are going to be broken. And partly also, look at what the world is really talking about. Apart from terrorism, it's global warming. We're not talking very much about HIV. It's certainly not about malnutrition and micronutrient malnutrition, or about malaria and all these other things. So I think there is a tendency that we over-worry so much about this one problem that we forget all the other things where we could do a lot more good.
Right, but there's an assumption then that if we then ask governments and policymakers to focus on these other issues, that they're going to actually keep their promise, because they won't. Because it's these major countries that promised to end child poverty, and they haven't done it. So the idea of asking the American government, the Canadian government, to well, don't worry about this right now. Let's worry about malaria and HIV in India and China. They just generally don't live up to their promises in the first place.
That's true. And so let's assume that you only actually get 10% out of governments, both when you talk about climate or when you talk about poverty. But I'm still saying, if then poverty is a much more effective way to actually deal with the world's ills, well, I'd like to have 10% of world government attention from poverty rather than in climate change.
There you go. Bjorn Lomborg is his name. Cool it, the Skeptical Environmentalist Guide to Global Warming. It's great to have you. Thanks.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Bjorn Lomborg, everybody. Obviously, a conversation that's going to generate a lot of debate. Please go to our website and email us the hour. We'll be right back.